So there was a time a long time ago in a decade far, far away called the early 2000s where Star Wars hype had reached an all-time high, the likes of which I personally believe still have not been seen since. The prequel trilogy was coming out movie by movie, and an avalanche of video games, novels, and all kinds of alternative media saturated the market, ensuring that there was no shortage of Star Wars content in between each film's release date. The peak of this hype, however, could arguably be said to have been the weeks leading up to the launch of the third episode of the series, Revenge of the Sith.
At last we will have revenge.
I actually have a vivid memory of being in a Walmart a couple of weeks before the movie launched, where they used to have those console setups for people to test play games while they shopped. It looked like one of these, but it was definitely an original Xbox and was on the Count Dooku boss battle. I stood there for several minutes with my brother as we handed the controller back and forth, enamored by the game and anxiously awaiting the opportunity to go see the movie for ourselves. I was around 9 at the time. For some reason, the game launched roughly 2 weeks before the actual movie did, and given that the game straight up spoils most of the events of the film while promising a few cool battles that the film doesn't actually deliver on, makes this feel like a very strange decision. Revenge of the Sith, the game, released on May 5th, 2005 for the PlayStation 2, Xbox, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, and the Symbian OS.
You can tell me what this is.
It was a smartphone operating system that was popular at the time, don't worry about it.
So uncivilized.
So for this video, I've opted to play through the PS2 version of the game, which is a first for me since it was always the Xbox version that I played as a kid. I'll also have a small segment dedicated to the Game Boy Advance section later in the video, so stick around for that as well. Although so far as I can tell, there is very little difference between the Xbox and PS2 versions, and both seem to feature pretty much the same content. Of all of the Star Wars games I've played, I have to say this one does feel like one of the most unique. I've never really played another game like it. In a weird way, this feels a lot like a spiritual successor to the Phantom Menace adaptation for the PS1. I know that sounds odd, but I mean in how their design philosophy feels. They both feel like alternate universe versions of the films they are adapting, adding new segments and telling slightly different versions of the stories. What's more is that both games lean heavily into a more psychotic iteration of their respective movie story. It feels strange to say, but I actually feel like the Phantom Menace game and the Revenge of the Sith game are kind of a duology. If you played them back to back, they'd feel like they were intended to go together. It's kind of a shame we didn't get a proper Episode 2 adaptation to finish off this little alt-universe game story into a trilogy. And no, the Game Boy Advance adaptation doesn't count. The mechanics of this are so interesting and fit the Star Wars world so well that I can't believe they didn't use the foundation they laid for this to make more Star Wars games in this format. It's not perfect or anything, but with a longer dev time and some more polish and tweaks, it would have made a really stellar template for more Star Wars games. There's a lot of really cool things about this game that make it incredibly unique, but before we get into all of that, I have to take a minute to thank the sponsor of this video, Flexispot. Now, if you're watching this channel, then you're probably like me and you probably spend a lot of time sitting down playing video games. Be it casually or competitively, we spend a lot of time sitting down. And it's really easy for us as gamers to get caught up into this idea that racing stripes and gaming chairs are the optimal go-to option for our experience. But I think after you've been through a handful of gaming chairs, you quickly realize that they're not very comfortable. So that's why I was so excited when Flexispot reached out to me to collaborate. So they sent me this, the C7 Max, and it is the most comfortable chair I've ever had in my life. And if we're comparing it to my old chair here, there's really no comparison. It's stiff, it's uncomfortable, it always has a weird lean to it, and then this just goes straight back down. It offers no lumbar support, and overall the choice is obvious when you compare the two. The best option is the C7 Max. I think my favorite aspect is the lumbar and lower back support because I have a bad tendency to slouch and lean back, so this makes it a lot easier for me to be comfortable while maintaining an upright position. And of course it does have the option to lean back further if you're just trying to relax, watch a movie, or a long-form video game retrospective. The whole seat features a thick layer of latex that provides optimal comfort for very long periods of time of being stuck in a chair. The firmness of the latex padding allows the cushion to maintain comfortability for years on end. You'll quickly notice how comfortable but firm the cushion and the padding are on this chair. And of course, that lumbar support cannot be beat. And I cannot tell you how useful these 5D armrests have been. A total godsend. And we can't forget one of the most unique parts, the footrest. If this sounds like the chair for you, then you can use my code C730 for a $30 discount. And if for some reason it's not for you, then you have 30 days to send it back in for a full refund. Not to mention that you can own it worry-free thanks to the 5-year warranty featuring direct replacements for damaged parts. So again, this chair has been a massive improvement to my gaming experience and workflow, so if you're interested, then make sure to use my code C730 for $30 off and enjoy the Flexispot C7 Max. Thanks again to Flexispot for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back into it. Whereas the Phantom Menace game opted to digitally recreate the film's scenes using CGI for its cutscenes, Revenge of the Sith pulls clips straight from the film itself, which allows players to feel as though they're watching highlights from the movie. Although custom cutscenes are still present in this game that do differentiate a bit from how the film progressed, but they're just rendered out in-engine this time. The first area acts as a sort of tutorial for how the gameplay functions, and immediately I was having fun. It's kind of like a hack and slash game mixed with a beat 'em up game, except way weightier than other similar games I've played in the past. The characters feel very heavy, and the animations feel like they're actually physically swinging a heavy lightsaber hilt around. Because of this, you can't rely on animation cancels or button mashing. You have to learn how long each of your moves takes and pay close attention to what attacks your enemies are doing in order to properly avoid or counter them, which makes every encounter demand your full attention in a way that can be very frustrating when you're unfamiliar with the controls and very satisfying when you've learned them. This is a game that kind of makes you get good to play it. Playing through each of these missions is an intensely scripted affair. The gameplay loop consists of entering a small section of level, killing a few waves of enemies, performing one of a few available scripted moves that gains you access to the next small section of level, and then repeating that for the rest of the game. The only time the game breaks from this loop is during a boss battle or turret section, of which there are several, and some of which are far more enjoyable than others.
If what you've told me is true, you will have gained my trust.
The game features 17 story missions, 5 bonus missions, and 4 unique co-op missions, all of which I will talk about in some capacity. In between each of the 17 story missions, we're given a character customization screen where we can select between various abilities to upgrade for the character we were playing as, utilizing however much experience we gained from the previously completed level. There's 2 categories, each with 5 skills for us to spread our allotted experience points across. A Force Powers category, and a Combat Skills category. The Force Powers are pretty self-explanatory. Force Push is fun, but not super useful when compared to Force Grasp, which I think is probably the best power in the game. I'd recommend leaving Force Push low on points. Both Anakin and Obi-Wan have a Force Stun ability that can halt an enemy in their tracks, but unless it's maxed out, it can end up destroying your combat flow, so you either need to pursue maxing it out or leaving it as low as well. Both Anakin and Obi-Wan have a Force Stun ability that can halt an enemy in their tracks, but unless it's maxed out, it can end up destroying your combat flow, so you either need to pursue maxing it out or leaving it low as well. Saber Throw is fun to integrate into combat, and Force Heal is going to pretty much be a necessity if you're playing on a harder difficulty. Both of these could be worth balancing a fair amount of points into. The combat skills are all going to be crucial, and I'd recommend trying to distribute as many of your points into these as you can. Now, like I mentioned earlier, every level in this game follows a near identical gameplay loop. Because of this, I can't really go level by level like I typically do in my videos because, well, most of it is just that exact gameplay loop across a variety of different levels. So what I'll do is skim through each of the game's missions and talk about all of the interesting differences or alterations made to the story exclusively for the game. The first level is pretty similar to the film overall, but there is a pretty cool scene where both Obi-Wan and Anakin work together to lift a downed ARC-170 starfighter. I mean, I always love big-scale uses of the Force like this, and it doesn't hurt that the ARC-170 is one of my favorite designs from the series. There's several more scenes like this throughout the game where we have to move around a big object with the Force, and I'm here for it. Makes the game feel that much more like a Jedi power fantasy. Other than that, it's a pretty basic opening level. The second level is where things start to get interesting. A lot of you are probably already familiar with the deleted scenes from Episode 3, one of which features Anakin and Obi-Wan cutting their way through the floor and into a fuel room after witnessing one of several times Jedi Master Shaak Ti has died in this series. That scene may have been cut from the film, but it's been drawn into an entire level now. The fuel room part, not Shaak Ti. We don't see her in this game. This level adds a lot of additional context to the events of the movie, and much like the Phantom Menace game, manages to extend a small scene into an entire level that actually ends up being fun to play. It even shows us how the two Jedi have learned to work together with the Force to accomplish their goals. Remember earlier when I said that in between every combat area you have to perform one of a selection of scripted actions to progress to the next area? Well, I'll point them all out as we go, and one of my favorites is this one that references the opening of the Phantom Menace, where we stab our lightsaber through a metal security door and twist it until it breaks open. Then we move on to a classic, the elevator mission. Fending off the destroyers, we head into the elevators and find ourselves in a very similar but expanded situation to the film, where we end up
On top of things.
They seriously expanded this section too, because in the film, Anakin's only outside of the elevator for a few seconds, but in the game, you're up here fending off droids for a solid few minutes, and even end up on top of a totally different elevator for a while. This goes on for some time before we reunite with Obi-Wan again.
Oh, it's you.
We go through a few halls, flip a few switches, and destroy some more battle droids before winding up right back in the elevators again.
Master, wait. This one's not...
This elevator situation goes on for a while until we finally reach the throne room, where we've got a score to settle with a certain Sith Lord.
Sith Lords are our specialty.
This is our first real duel of the game, and despite boss battle duels being only roughly 35% of the overall combat loop, they're still by far the best part. And the game's cutscene actually shows us a bit of extra footage that wasn't even in the movie.
Just because there are two of you, do not assume you have the advantage.
The dueling is really the best part of the game, and it's kind of like a fulfillment of LucasArts' original hope to make a fighting game all the way back with Masters of Teräs Käsi. Except that one sucked, and this one is actually fun. Even though most of your time in the single-player mode will be spent in a more hack-and-slash style gameplay loop, it's so clear that these mechanics were designed with lightsaber dueling like this in mind. They even bothered to account for if you knock a super battle droid down this shaft.
Stop now while you still have a chance.
Even Dooku's classic swordsmanship stance has been brought over. In fact, every character has their own unique fighting style inspired by the films here. It's kind of a known fact that Anakin's iconic guard stance was just a random pose he struck while motion capturing because he thought it looked cool. Well, that's that. Anakin gets separated from Obi-Wan and Palpatine due to some ray shields, and we're given an entire level of just trying to re-link with them. It's a little fillery, but it's also pretty fun. I like that the game is trying to give us every excuse to fight through more battle droids. Something fun that I have a good opportunity to point out here is that occasionally we have to cut into a wall panel to expose wires we can cut through to progress. I love how much this game utilizes the lightsaber.
Alert. All places in Sector 7. Alert. Initiating emergency magnetic field on Sector 7 entry.
After we find Obi-Wan and the Chancellor, we manage to make our way into the turret room where... Now you know we had to have a turret section. This is a gem released in the early 2000s after all. Hopping onto the cannon, we start blasting holes into the CIS ship, which they wouldn't expect since we're technically a friendly ship, and...
Nicely done.
Is that music from Knights of the Old Republic 2? Yeah, so this game features music from the Mark Grisky KOTOR 2 score, and not just sometimes, it plays often throughout the story mode. This was a very welcome addition in my opinion, because KOTOR 2 is quite possibly my favorite Star Wars media, and its score features some of the best Star Wars music we've ever gotten.
A surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
Once we finally tear that ship apart, we're able to move on.
Ray shields. Wait a minute. How did this happen? We're smarter than this.
Being taken to the bridge, our heroes are confronted by General Grievous, the same way as they did in the film. This is where the game starts to kick the training wheels right off of your playthrough. The Magna Guards are able to dodge you, block you, and counterattack you. Until this point, players could basically just button mash, hack, and slash their way through the enemy droids, but starting now, the game kind of forces you to get good. As you'll see, I was failing to recognize the game's demands of me to try and recognize enemy attack patterns and counter appropriately, and this would result in several retries on my part. This pattern would continue for several more chapters until I got frustrated enough to stop playing casually and actually start paying attention to the game.
Strap yourselves in.
Once we tackle the Magna Guards and crash land back on Coruscant, we join Obi-Wan on his mission to hunt General Grievous on the planet of Utapau. Look, I love Obi-Wan, and the Utapau setting where he fights Grievous is prime potential for some great levels. But these missions are awful. It's not like it gets worse from here or anything, it's just this mission and the one after it, and due mostly to these super battle droids that grab you and throw you around. These things are pretty much the only thing about this game I don't like. They're super annoying to fight, break the flow of combat, and are borderline just totally broken enemies because of how hard it is to avoid getting grabbed. Wait a second, aren't those the same Cortosis super battle droids from the new droid army? Okay, I'm just going to headcanon that this game is also in the same video game continuity as the new droid army now. Jumping down to this balcony, this is starting to resemble an old school platforming game the way we're dodging these vents, but we can disable them by throwing our lightsaber at the power cable. Even the design of this environment feels so much like how Star Wars used to look. I mean, everything I'm seeing here looks like it could have been lifted straight out of a mission in Jedi Academy. Another of the progression animations we have here is the ability to slice a square hole into doors that stand in our way, which again, I love. Lightsabers used to be so OP. Then this turret starts spamming us with shots to try and incentivize us to use the Force Speed ability, but it uses up your force power so quickly that it's almost counterproductive to use it. Overall, this is the first of many very annoying sections on these Utapau levels, but it gets more annoying after this. The little turret section that lets us blow up a bunch of droids is fun though. This was a fine way to spice up the gameplay loop, if a bit uninspired. As we jump down into the next area, our next boss battle reveals itself to us. A crab droid, which makes for a very cool and underutilized droid design that I actually enjoyed fighting. Just gotta learn its moveset, jump on its back, and slash it to pieces until it shuts down. With the crab droid turned into a scrap heap, Obi-Wan leaps onto the upper levels as we move deeper into the facility to find and confront Grievous.
Hello there.
Now, something that you may not actually know is that there was originally supposed to be a fight scene between Obi-Wan and Grievous's Magna Guards. You can even find a clip of the choreographed fight showing exactly how it would have fit into the film. The entire fight was cut, however, to make it appear as though Obi-Wan just pulls down the crate to destroy them before the fight can occur. This is speculated to have been done to save production time so the film could release on schedule. Which sucks, and I would have preferred the fight remain, although after reading some comments, I appear to be in the minority with that one, as many seem to feel the cut was warranted and appropriate for his character. What I'll say is this. We watch Obi-Wan lose the fight against Dooku, and then go on to lose the saber fight against Grievous, only pulling out a win by using a blaster, and then beat Anakin at the end. It would have been nice to get a little extra Obi-Wan action in the film, and this was such a great way to show off his blade prowess. As you can see though, the game keeps the fight very much intact, which I like. We get to play out what could have been before eventually the clones arrive. As you are seeing, they show up a bit earlier than they did in the film since the fight with Grievous hasn't happened yet, but that's because there's a few things we need to do before our showdown with him. And after the clones arrive, the game treats us to the most lamentable arena of the entire game. There's no way around it, fellas. These Cortosis droids, or whatever the hell they are, wound up being the single most insufferable aspect of the entire game. I mean, they damn near grind the gameplay to a total halt when they arrive to demand you ignore everything else so you can play counter the pattern with them, repeatedly. With enough tenacity, though, we can cut through to the next section where we get to fight a couple of Magna droids, and use the Force to move a large object, which is another of those animation transitions I keep bringing up. The level then ends on another crab droid boss battle, which we can make some pretty quick work of. There's still the matter of dealing with General Grievous, though, and so we enter our second duel of the game.
Here is where you meet your end, Kenobi.
We'll see about that.
Again, the duels are simply the absolute bread and butter of this game. I like the fact that there's levels dedicated to more hack and slashy style gameplay, but the duel missions where we 1v1 major opponents is where the game really becomes fun. It makes me question once again how they never used this engine for other Star Wars games. I find myself hoping someone does some kind of PC port of this soon so we can at least hopefully get some total conversion mods or something. I'd kill for someone to reskin the enemies here and just make a game version of one of the EU novels. Do you see the potential here? With some proper mod tools, you could crank out like 3 to 5 EU novel adaptations, and it'd be some of the best Star Wars content we've ever seen. One of the coolest aspects about these duels is how they all have level transitions. So across every level, you'll end up seeing several different cool areas to fight in, even when it makes no sense with the film. Like fighting Grievous in these caves until we beat him back enough to run away, where we reach the epic final battle against him in front of his ship, although the way Obi-Wan beats him here is quite a bit different from the movie.
So uncivilized.
Anyway, what's Anakin up to?
What are you doing?
He's a traitor to the Republic. Letting him live is too dangerous.
Letting you kill him is against our Jedi beliefs. I won't allow it.
Damn, Annie, I don't remember all of this happening in the movie. He's really getting in there for real.
So be it.
It's completely inaccurate to the film, of course, but a sick showdown between Mace Windu and Anakin through Palpatine's office is something so cool that I can't quite describe it. This would be the best level of the game if it didn't just keep getting better from here. This is a little over halfway through the game's story mode, but it feels like where the game only just really begins. Pretty much every single level from this point on is fantastic and completely lacks the filler-feeling nature of the earlier levels. Non-canonical as it may be, this battle between Anakin and Mace is downright epic. The storm rages between the two Jedi in the background of a brightly lit Coruscant high-rise. It's incredible. Eventually, Mace jumps back into Palpatine's office and the two have one last skirmish before, well, you know what happens next. That's quite a bit different from the film. Man, this game is significantly more brutal than the movie, and as if to reinforce that point to the player, the next level will be taking us somewhere few Star Wars games like to go. To the dark side. As a newly knighted Darth Vader, we actually get to play out the assault on the Jedi Temple here, which immediately makes this one of the most important Star Wars games ever made.
That is not within the Chancellor's power.
That's Jocasta Nu. As you may recall if you watched my video on Dark Forces 2, she was Jarek's Jedi Master before he fell to the dark side.
Morgan Katar!
Yeah, that's right. Vader straight up murders her in the Legends canon, rather than her and every other Jedi known to man surviving Order 66 like in the Disney canon. This is a significantly more appropriate demise for her character than what the Disney continuity wrote for her, and so far as I'm concerned regarding that newer iteration,
It does not exist.
dozens of Jedi came after Vader here, but we're basically a tank at this point. We're able to pick them up by the throat and stab them straight through, killing them instantly. You know, back when being stabbed by a lightsaber meant you were going to actually die. Also, Vader has a Force lightning power because this game is committed to being as cool as possible. We even have the clones here helping us cut through these Jedi, and Anakin is really unleashing the Force here now. These missions alone make this game an absolute must-play for Star Wars fans. Getting to play through a version of Order 66 as a completely overpowered version of Anakin is such an interesting and fun idea, and although you can get a version of it in mods and a few other media, I think there's a strong case to make that this is the best version of it. If anyone from Night Dive or Aspire is watching this right now, maybe consider that these levels deserve to be playable on modern platforms like PC. I mean, come on, this is awesome. The game just lets us slaughter through so many Jedi. This is probably in the top 5 edgiest Star Wars games, honestly. I particularly love this part where we fight across a bridge where we see Coruscant in the background. It's so good. The level ends on a turret section, which is fine, I guess. I mean, it's interesting that we get to blow up half a dozen Jedi starfighters, but I guess that explains where they all went. After that, Anakin heads deeper into the temple to place the false distress signal that will lure other Jedi back to the temple to their demise, and I haven't talked about this yet, but the voice actor they got for Anakin just didn't really nail it in this game.
That will bring any surviving Jedi home, where I will be waiting for them.
I mean, honestly, he does a decent job of sounding like Hayden, but man, he's just kind of not doing very well at the actual delivery at all. Obi-Wan's voice actor is brilliant, since they used James Arnold Taylor, who would go on to voice him in the Clone Wars series as well. Anyway, we end up encountering a more powerful Jedi than the ones we've been fighting so far in the form of Sarah, the apprentice of Jedi Master Sandralig, who I'll get to. Sarah Keto is a surprisingly underutilized Jedi Knight who specialized in Jarkai, which is the art of dual-wielding lightsabers. She fought in the Clone Wars as a general, same as the rest of the Jedi, and there isn't a lot of information about her. She only appeared in one other thing besides this game, and that was in a comic short story featured in Star Wars Clone Wars Adventures Volume 4. That comic saw both Sarah and Anakin fighting off an infestation of pink blob-like alien across a space station. This brief situation was their only prior experience working together, and they didn't get along very well as their personalities clashed. Now she finds herself staring down a far darker version of Anakin than the one she met before. I like this fight quite a lot, honestly. I think Sarah is a cool character, and she makes for a great penultimate boss fight for the Siege of the Jedi Temple. It's such a great note here, too, that during this hallway where we fight Sarah, we can hear a recording of a Jedi Master reciting the Jedi Code out loud. Such a good touch for this game's world building. Sarah is clearly a very formidable opponent, well-trained and far more powerful than most of the other Jedi we fought until this point. Unfortunately for her, it's not enough.
Your favorite student is no more.
And with that, our battle begins against Jedi Master Sindralig. Of course, let's go ahead and get the obvious out of the way. Sindralig is portrayed by the stunt coordinator from the 3 prequel films, Nick Gillard, which is just Sindralig spelled backwards with the K removed. Although they only used his likeness and opted to have the character be voiced by Tom Kane. I love this character actually. Although he wasn't used very much outside of the events of episode 3, he did appear briefly in the Clone Wars series and was mentioned in a novel or two. But overall, despite being one of the best saber duelists in the temple, his position was to safeguard the temple, and as such meant he rarely ever left to participate in any battles. So he wasn't really involved in the Clone Wars all that much. Still, he makes for a fantastic boss battle to end the siege of the Jedi Temple. I love how he integrates Force speed into his actual lightsaber movements like this. It makes him such a unique opponent. There's also some implied tension between them as Dralig goads Anakin about his Chosen One prophecy, taunting him to live up to the legend.
There's one lesson you've yet to learn. How to become one with the Force.
I'm no longer the learner. It's your turn now.
That's some pent-up aggression from Anakin there. Again, I have to point out the backdrop of this arena. I mean, we see the Jedi Temple in flames as various clone LAATs fire off shots into various buildings. This is probably one of the coolest fighting arenas ever placed in a Star Wars game. Regardless of his skills, however, he still isn't able to match Anakin's overall power, and so his death comes harshly from a well-placed lightsaber to the chest. Again, those used to be fatal.
This will be a day long remembered. Soon the Jedi will be no more.
Man, I bet that would have sounded so cool with some better delivery. Anyway, let's check in on Obi-Wan. What's he doing?
You're too late to help me here, troopers. Head up to the next platform.
I'm sorry, sir. We are no longer required to follow your orders.
What did you say, soldier?
Ouch, looks like he's not doing too hot right now. You can already guess what this next mission consists of. We're going to be fighting off both clones and droids here. But there are a few cool events that happen worth taking a look at. Like taking out these ATRTs is fun. These are a great enemy type for this style of gameplay and make for a really fun addition to the gameplay loop. On the other side of that coin, these clone jet troopers are super annoying and a completely awful addition. They basically take the place of those Cortosis droids I pointed out earlier, and they're very unfun to fight. Then they make us fight an LAAT, like actually straight up we have to dodge its attacks and try to damage it with explosive fuel crates and deflecting blaster shots until it goes down. The real fun is when Obi-Wan jumps down on top of an HAVW A5 Juggernaut.
How do I keep getting myself into these situations?
Destroy the Jedi.
Well, anywhere's better than here.
Yeah, so I honestly really love this. Obi-Wan leaping down on top of an HAVW and slaughtering a horde of clones on top of it is actually really cool, and I'm here for it. This is the kind of insane thing I want from my Star Wars adaptation games. With that destroyed, Obi-Wan sprints back out to the ship Grievous was going to try escaping on and flies off to meet Bail Organa like in the film. Meanwhile, let's go check back in with Darth Vader. Do you guys remember how Vader got sent to Mustafar to assassinate the remaining Separatist leaders? Well,
I have a message from Darth Sidious.
Message? What message?
This!
Yeah, he's killing people now, so we're committed. With the Separatist leaders still hiding out in their office, the rest of this level will be dedicated to working our way through this Mustafar facility in order to find them. Playing as a peak-powered Darth Vader in his prime before the High Ground incident is such a treat, and once again, I'm loving playing through this level. It's so cool. I mean, look at his aura right here. Quite simply, unmatched. Mustafar makes an incredible set piece for the game too. I mean, it's a lava planet reliant on thick Durasteel balconies for traversal. Well, mostly.
Your guns won't help you now.
Enough.
I do unironically love this game, actually. We're closing in on the Separatist leaders, and soon all that will be left is to destroy them and put an end to this war.
I can't get too close. Who's next?
Now, if, for some reason, you've managed to convince yourself that this game plans to pull any punches, let me just go ahead and assure you that yes, you get to slay the Separatist leaders yourself.
He's locked it! We're trapped!
Yeah, so you just kinda... you brutally strike these poor aliens down, man. It's pretty rough to watch, much less do yourself.
There's much you fail to understand.
It's such a good level all the way up until the boss battle. We have to fight this ship as Anakin by dodging its attacks and disposing of enemy NPCs, but honestly, it's just not very fun in my opinion. I didn't really like this boss battle, and I kind of feel like the game would have benefited immensely from its removal, but I mean, it's here, so whatever. Of course, Vader does manage to destroy the thing and walk away like a true Sith. Which leads us back over to Obi-Wan, where he has relinked with Yoda to take us on another of the best levels in the game. Like I said earlier, about the time we fight Mace Windu as Anakin, it's all so good from there. Yoda and Obi-Wan get to fight together side by side within the Jedi Temple ruins as we cut through a small army of clone soldiers in order to make our way to the beacon and disable it to prevent other Jedi from mistakenly coming back here. Fighting the clones is actually really satisfying, as is getting to see Yoda in action, much less at your side for most of the mission. I also really love how we get a very different take on the Jedi Temple level that shows us the aftermath of the siege that we ourselves led only a few missions ago. This section was so short in the film itself, and I've always wondered if there was more footage from the temple scene of Obi-Wan and Yoda infiltrating it than we actually got.
An act of hatred, this was.
There's such a strong sense of melancholy throughout the level as we slice through the clones and they call us Jedi traitors in various ways. Seeing the desolated ruins of the place Obi-Wan once called home must have been such an intensely devastating sensation for him here. Not to mention Yoda, who had lived here for hundreds of years. Although despite my enjoying this level a lot, I'm not terribly crazy about this turret section where we have to shoot a bunch more LAATs. I mean, it's not bad, but the turret segments aren't very good overall anyway. And despite being the last one of the game, it just felt like one too many, if that makes sense. Luckily, this isn't where the mission ends. Instead, we get introduced to the clone assassins, who are really cool.
I preferred it when the clones were our allies.
These guys are awesome. I love how they can move around so fast and dodge our attacks, and their design is exceptional. They're kinda like the clone version of the Magna Guards, but way more aesthetically pleasing in my subjective opinion. They're also pretty hard to fight too. I had to really take my time to figure out their movement patterns and fight back accordingly. After some patience and proper counterattacks, we cut the clone assassins down and disable the fake beacon. There's no need to play any lead up to this. We both know what happens next, don't we? I mean, this is what it's really all about, isn't it? The best fight in Star Wars history, and we get to play out a version of it ourselves. The game knows how meaningful this fight is too, because it winds up being the longest duel in the game by far. Every major scene and set piece we would hope to see is present here, except for the part where they're swinging around on loose cables.
I wasn't prepared to train someone like you!
Yeah, that much is for sure. There's so many great stage transitions across this fight, and throughout the whole thing you can see the whole facility falling apart behind them. A lot of care went into trying to make this game really feel like a true companion piece to the film. A cheap cash grab movie tie-in, this is not. The final part of the fight takes place on this small floating platform, which is fairly true to the film, and an epic final arena to end the story as the Duel of the Fates plays in the background. And I think everyone knows about the high ground incident that follows the end of this fight, although the game skips over the ending dialogue and has Obi-Wan just brutally grab the lightsaber and walk away. We're then shown Vader's true birth and Luke being handed over to Owen and Beru before the game ends. It's a fantastic adaptation of the film, and arguably one of the best movie-to-video game adaptations ever made. Outside of a few hiccups and odd gameplay decisions, this game is a total gem. Of course, that's not where the game really ends though, is it? I still have to talk about the 5 bonus missions, 4 multiplayer challenge missions, and of course the alternative ending that this game is mostly known for. Since we're already talking about the final battle right now anyway, let's just jump straight into the alternative ending. Since we played the last mission as Obi-Wan, this alternative ending makes us replay the whole thing again as Anakin, but the real difference happens when you beat the level. When Anakin leaps into the air to attack Obi-Wan where he would normally be diced, Obi-Wan misses his attack and... So Anakin slays his old master, having succeeded in his attack before kicking his body down the hill and walking away victorious. He then meets with Palpatine at the shuttle, who hands over a new lightsaber to fully recognize Anakin as a true Sith now. Anakin promptly thanks Palpatine with a powerful betraying stab through his chest, leaving the clones very uncertain of what to do.
No, the galaxy belongs to me.
And that's probably the most talked about aspect of the game right there, which, I mean, well deserved. That's a really cool alternative ending. I love the main campaign on offer here. It's easily some of the most unique Star Wars gameplay you can find while still being solid and enjoyable to play. That's not everything the game has to offer though, so let's get into all of the extra bonus missions available for players to enjoy after completing the main story mode. There's 5 bonus missions we can unlock by playing through the game that allow us to play with characters we wouldn't otherwise get to use outside of the multiplayer duel mode. The first of these is the worst of them, but still with a unique enough enough concept to make it worth a try. We play as one of General Grievous's Magna Guards on Utapau as we try to stave off an army of clone enemies. There's another Magna Guard with us here to help, but he's honestly not the most useful. This ended up being one of the hardest missions in the game because of how wonky this guy is to control. I mean, every attack has so much wind up that you basically have to hit the button and wait 2 solid seconds for the attack to land. The whole thing was just mad janky. The second of the bonus missions is one that lets us play as General Grievous, and it's way cooler. I honestly could have stood to play a whole campaign of just Grievous. It's so fun, and his moves are so cool. He can use a blaster pistol, and even split his arms into 4 like in the film. It's amazing. The whole mission takes place in these caves, which is a fun little nondescript location for it to be, but we have to fight both clones and droids for some reason, which doesn't make much sense to me. Yeah, I know, it's just a challenge mission, it's not that serious, whatever. I just like to point out little things like this. I'm not actually bothered by it. Once we've cut through all of the fodder NPCs, Obi-Wan drops down as a final boss to the level for us to overcome. All in all, it's a fun excuse to play as Grievous here. This third level is particularly interesting because it's a platforming challenge level, and this game is not a platformer. I mean, the platform-esque mechanics aren't bad by any means, but I also think they could have used a little bit of work. It is a testament to just how unique the gameplay of this title is, though. I'm still salty we didn't get more Star Wars games built on this format. Like I said before, the platforming isn't bad, so the level overall is still fun, but most importantly, it's not frustrating. The challenge feels fair, and any mistakes made I had to attribute to my own error. The fourth bonus mission is not only one of the best in the whole game, it's also my favorite. We get to play as Yoda just utterly destroying these clones in the ruins of the Jedi Temple. Yoda has a completed and polished moveset specific to his character that looks and feels great to play. I loved this. I mean, how often do we get to play as Yoda in a version that features all of the insane spins and movements that he was capable of in the films? It's rare, and no part of this mission disappoints in my opinion. The only negative thing I could even try to say about this is that there isn't enough of it. I mean, how long must it have taken to program this character to play like this? It's so fluid and fun, I have to assume it was months, and all for one bonus mission? Maybe they were planning on featuring him on a Kashyyyk-based mission, or possibly even his battle against Darth Sidious? I find it far easier to believe that they planned to use him in multiple story missions, and they all just got cut for time, than I do that they did all of this work just to throw him in one short bonus mission. Also, imagine the modding potential if this was ported to PC. I'm just saying. The final bonus mission takes us out of Episode 3 and into Episode 4 to play the final battle between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader on the Death Star where Obi-Wan met his end. This is a brilliant addition to the game and a great treat for Star Wars fans. I mean, you have to have Vader be a playable character in the video game based on the film that is entirely about how he came to exist. Anything less would have been unacceptable. We can even see the Falcon in the background if you get the camera facing the right way.
You came nothing? You're braver than I thought.
Nice.
The final piece of playable content for me to go over here are the co-op levels, which, I mean, there isn't honestly a ton to say because they're very simple. There's 4 of these in total, so let me just go over each one. The first places us back on General Grievous's ship where Anakin and Obi-Wan make their way through this droid tri-fighter hangar, which leads us into the cruiser's cargo hold. 3 of the 4 co-op missions follows this exact progression of starting in a small room, eliminating all of the enemies and moving into the next small room, then repeating this several times until the mission ends. It's simple, but back in 2005, this would have easily been the highlight of 2 friends or siblings month. The second level is a sort of continuation of the first as Anakin and Obi-Wan move into the cruiser's corridors. This one was also pretty fun, but I felt like the environments were a little bit less interesting overall than the other 3. Speaking of which, the third mission takes us to Utapau where Obi-Wan and Anakin work together to hold down one room. This one kinda sucks since there's no progression or anything. We're just kind of stuck in this one room where waves of enemies bear down on us. The description calls it a survival mission, which I guess is accurate, but it still felt like it lacked variety. It's cool to headcanon this as a what if Anakin had gone with Obi-Wan to Utapau, though. Lastly, the final co-op focused level sees us back in the Jedi Temple during the Jedi Purge, where we get to play as Sendralig and Saraketo. I really wish they dialed this one in a little more because it was my favorite one conceptually and had the most potential out of all of them. In fact, I kind of feel like they should have scrapped the other 3 and made all 4 co-op missions based around these 2 characters defending the temple. I get why they opted not to go that route though. The final sequence where we fend off multiple vehicles while on an exterior bridge of the temple is so cool. It had the potential to be one of the most iconic sequences of the game if they just put a little more emphasis on how unique these 2 characters were in this plot concept. Each of these levels is pretty short overall, with me completing all 4 in just under 30 minutes, despite taking my time with them. The whole idea does feel a bit tacked on, but I still love their inclusion, and I'm glad they're here. Now, although that's all of the major offerings of the PS2 version of the game, I felt like it would be appropriate to go ahead and talk about the mobile version as well, so I pulled my previous Game Boy Advance coverage of Revenge of the Sith to go over that port of the game here now. Star Wars Revenge of the Sith is one of those hyper-rare movies with a really good video game adaptation to go with it, and that's well known. But what may surprise you to hear is that it also had a totally different adaptation released for the Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS. This handheld version was both developed and published by Ubisoft Montreal and saw release alongside its major console counterparts on May 5th, 2005. Which is surprising because that was before the actual movie even released, letting players spoil some of the major plot points from the film for themselves, and even giving them some unrealistic expectations for the film, like seeing the duel between Anakin and Sindralig. No, the 2-second hologram fight from the film doesn't count as seeing a real duel. Now, despite the Game Boy Advance version looking very similar to the Nintendo DS one, there is one major difference to note, and that's the removal of the Starfighter missions which appear in said DS game. Which is honestly fine by me. If the devs didn't think the game would benefit from trying to include them in some shape, then it probably means doing so would have made the experience worse. From what I've seen, it's actually common rhetoric to suggest that this is the best Star Wars game on the GBA, and I can see why. It's a really solid game. You'll see that it's a 2.5D side-scrolling beat-em-up style game where you can kind of move in all 4 directions. You can utilize a primary attack, a jump move, and a few special moves like Anakin's ground pound. There's a variety of really cool force powers to sprinkle into your gameplay depending on which character you're playing as too, and you can even level up your character by selecting which powers to put points into. This is one of the most interesting factors available actually. At the end of every level, you'll get a screen displaying how you performed on said level, how many points you accumulated, and then one to allow you to distribute those points across a list of force powers. And even better, Obi-Wan and Anakin have a set of unique powers only they can use. Anakin's available powers are Saber Throw, Absorb, Rage, and Choke. Choke being easily the coolest power in the game. Obi-Wan can choose between Force Speed, Heal, Shield, and Mind Trick. Force Push and Pull are neutral powers available to both characters. The powers you select do directly impact your gameplay experience, and the amount of points you accumulate throughout a given playthrough won't be enough to get all of the abilities leveled up to their maximum potential, so there's some room for replay value here to mix up what powers you use. It doesn't stop there though, because after that, you get to select one of 3 traits to upgrade on your character. You can choose between Stamina, Strength, and Intuition, which is just your force meter. All of this incentivizes players to focus on how they complete levels and be aware of slashing objects in the environment so they can find more points to upgrade their Jedi of choice. Speaking of choosing which Jedi to play as, they only share the first 2 levels and the first boss battle. True to form, Anakin and Obi-Wan's paths branch away and go very differently from one another, and because of that, the character you select will change the experience you get. If you select Anakin, which was my first playthrough, you'll play the first 2 missions on the Separatist ship and encounter Count Dooku as your first boss battle. After this, however, Anakin goes to Coruscant, where we see his heated discussion with Mace Windu over being put on the Jedi Council but not granted the rank of Master.
What?
For some reason, this bridge is loaded with Trade Federation battle droids and even an AAT, which turned out to be super frustrating to fight. I'm not even going to bother trying to justify this with lore, it won't work, this is purely for gameplay purposes. Eventually we reach Palpatine, and Anakin has his confrontation about him being the Sith Lord they've been searching for. Windu tells Anakin to wait and goes to arrest Palpatine just like the film. Then, the same thing from earlier occurs as we fight towards Palpatine's chambers and have to carve through literally hundreds more battle droids. What's that old term? Ludonarrative dissonance? Yeah, there obviously wouldn't be 500 battle droids hiding on Coruscant, but whatever, it's just for the game. The next boss battle is against Mace Windu, and it's actually pretty fun. Boss battles in this game are all about recognizing patterns and adapting to them, which is exactly what you want from a solid boss battle in a video game. After beating Mace Windu,
what have I done?
He accepts his new title, and we stop playing as Anakin and start playing as Darth Vader, which leads us to playing some of the best levels in the game. Yeah, we're storming the Jedi Temple. There are not many games that let us play as a fallen Jedi carving through a temple of other Jedi like they're made of paper, so this game gets my praise based on that alone. And man, do we carve through a lot of Jedi. While I'm playing through the temple, I'd like to point out how fluid these animations are. I'm more than comfortable calling this the best animated Star Wars game on the GBA. Its art style, detail, and even the amount of frames per animation are all phenomenal. Not to mention how cool it is to play as Anakin winning multiple 3v1s against Jedi trying to overtake him in the archives. Then we get our next boss battle against Jedi Master Sindralig, who's actually named after one of the stunt coordinators on the movie, except spelled backwards. His name was Nick Gillard. This is another fun battle to play through, and even took me a few attempts to learn. Sindralig is a great character, very underused. With that complete, Sidious sends Vader to Mustafar to exterminate the last of the Separatist forces, and it sucks. These last two levels are actually awful. They're just a total test of patience and spam you with spongy enemies to waste your time and frustrate you. Some of the enemies even have longer weapons than you do, and it's just really annoying, and it kind of feels repetitive by this point since we end up fighting yet another AAT. Like, come on. It's a shame I don't have more to say about this one, but I just wasn't having much fun. So it's a good thing this final boss battle is actually pretty cool. And I mean, how could it not be? Anakin versus Obi-Wan, the final battle between Master and Apprentice, and it doesn't disappoint at all. We get two phases of the fight, one on a bridge with lava in the background, and another on the moving platform on the lava river. I'll admit, I kinda spammed the Force choke ability, but like... Eventually, we're able to beat Obi-Wan and see the ending cutscene. I won't talk as much about the Obi-Wan campaign because it's pretty much exactly the same beats as the movie. Like I mentioned earlier, Obi-Wan shares the first two missions and the first boss battle against Dooku, but when things veer off, Obi-Wan heads to Utapau, where we'll be for a while. It's a lot of fighting the same battle droids as usual, except with the addition of battling Grievous's IG-100 Magna Guards. I actually kinda like fighting them too, they're a fun challenge. The General Grievous boss battle doesn't disappoint either. I really enjoy these for some reason. I had a lot of fun with every boss we fight in this game, even the worst one, which we're about to get to. After we're done frying General Grievous,
so uncivilized,
we head into Obi-Wan's answer to Anakin's Temple Siege missions. Obi-Wan has to cut through a ton of clones in order to escape from Utapau, but it's definitely dragged out quite a bit more than it should have been. Although I will admit that the different fauna and caves are a really unique and interesting addition to the game that gives it something special you can't find in other Star Wars games. Oh yeah, and here's that boss I mentioned a minute ago. It's just a gold-colored Magna Guard. Nothing too crazy, but at least it's fun. After this, we get Obi-Wan's version of Anakin's Mustafar missions, which puts Obi-Wan and Yoda heading to the Jedi Temple and cutting through a few dozen clone troopers so they can activate the distress beacon to keep other Jedi away. Fighting clones as Obi-Wan is really fun, and these missions are far less awful than Anakin's Mustafar missions, so that's an added bonus. After reaching the end of the temple, it's the big finale again, and we all know how that goes. That's the game. There's no bonuses or special missions or anything, but the amount of effort and functionality integrated into the main game means that isn't really necessary. After beating the game, you get what is basically a New Game Plus that lets you keep your leveled character while allowing you to earn even more points and gain all of the powers. There is additional content available for the multiplayer mode that features 3 more unique planets to play on, reportedly based on their inclusions in Tarkovsky's 2003 Clone Wars miniseries. Those planets are Dantooine, Moonalynist, and Yavin 4. Now, I didn't have a way to play the multiplayer for this, so shout out to Aaron Monroe for his footage on this one. With all of this in mind, I think it's very clear why so many consider this the cream of the GBA Star Wars crop. It looks great, plays well, and offers the most satisfying and fulfilled gameplay experience overall between the leveling mechanic, different force powers, and tightly knit combat. So it won't surprise you to hear this GBA version received a 73 score on Metacritic, which is probably accurate. I might say it's even better than that and call it a solid 75 personally. Revenge of the Sith for the GBA is an immersive and highly enjoyable way to experience the events from the movie and is easily the best Star Wars movie adaptation on the GBA. Playing the events of the Jedi Temple March alone is enough to make this game worth trying out for fans of the series, but there's plenty of other fun stuff here to check out, and if you can get a friend to grab a GBA with you and link them together, then you can see the unique multiplayer levels available. Or even if you're just hoping to get an interesting Episode 3 related experience to sit down and enjoy by yourself with your favorite YouTuber on in the background, it's still worth going in and playing in my opinion. Revenge of the Sith for the Nintendo Game Boy Advance is genuinely a fantastic Star Wars game, and is still to this day absolutely a game worth playing. Having multiple versions of a video game to film adaptation all be this good is a little bit unheard of. I mean, even if you're not a massive Star Wars fan or anything, you still have to admit that this is an impressive showing from LucasArts and the other involved parties. It really does feel like thousands of people all banded together to ensure that Revenge of the Sith was one of the biggest and most exciting projects ever released within the entertainment medium. The gameplay is great, if a bit clunky, the visuals are stunning, the concepts are incredible, and the whole project was just such a treat for me to sink my teeth into for the last few weeks. I loved it, and clearly I mostly have positive things to say about the whole experience. Back when it was released, however, not everyone was as enamored by what it had achieved as I was. The PS2 version of the game currently shows a surprisingly low 60 out of 100 on Metacritic, with the Xbox sporting a barely superior 61. Look, I get it. There are quite a few things that could have been improved here, but a 60 is absolutely not a fair score for this, not by a long shot. I get the feeling some of these reviewers were just salty that they had to learn the mechanics to overcome a few of the enemy NPCs. Revenge of the Sith is not a perfect game, not by any means. During my time with it, I ran into plenty of situations where I was scratching my head wondering how or why the developers opted to do certain things the way they did, but these times were significantly fewer than the ones where I was just having a ton of fun playing the game. For casual fans of old school PS2 games, I'm sure you would find plenty here to enjoy. I mean, there's really nothing else like this. At least not that I've ever played. For Star Wars fans like me, you're likely to find a lot to love with this one. From all of the fun and insane deviations from the film's plot to the fitting inclusion of KOTOR 2's soundtrack, this is absolutely a must-play for any real Star Wars fan. If you haven't played it yet, I cannot recommend you try it enough, and if you have played it but it's been a few years, then I would say it's probably worth revisiting, especially with a friend who's also into Star Wars. There's a lot of Star Wars games out there, and I know it can be pretty overwhelming to keep track of which ones you should play and which ones might not be worth checking out, but I'm telling you right now, this is definitely one worth trying out for yourself.
Is that the best you got? You'll have to try harder than that.
Thanks so much for sticking this one out with me, guys. Revenge of the Sith is my favorite of the Star Wars films, and it's so nice to know that the video game adaptation is actually a fun time to play through. If you watched all this way, then I'd assume you enjoyed the video, and I'd ask that you click on that like button. That really does help me out with the channel, as does leaving comments, so drop those down below so I can see what you guys thought of this one. If you haven't already, then you should definitely subscribe to the channel, because I specialize in covering old video games like this, and I think there's a strong possibility there's something for most gaming fans to enjoy here. Thanks again everyone for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video, but until then, that's all I've got for you.